Hey everyone, welcome back to episode 3 of Beyond Boba, a podcast brought to you by AAPI interns. This week we'll be talking about actually Boba Liberalism, which I'm really excited about because that's kind of our premise for the podcast. I'm Charlie.
And I'm Sarah. And once again, just to preface, this is a super complex issue, Boba liberalism, and we won't be able to explore all the nooks and crannies and crevices of this topic, but we do encourage y'all to take the time beyond this podcast, beyond listening, just to do your own research and learn more about Boba liberalism. And we also wanted to give a quick trigger warning since we will be talking about the recent uprise in violence against Asian Americans. So please keep that in mind. And yeah. All right, so let's just get into what Boba liberalism is. Um, Boba liberalism was first coined by at diaspora underscore is underscore red on Twitter. I don't know if their username has changed over the years or over the months. I don't know when it was coined, but maybe their username has changed. But that was what we found. And it is essentially just like this form of Asian American activism that's characterized by its lack of substance and just lack of nuanced understanding. So very much like Boba, like this kind of activism is just like very sweet, very inoffensive, and very like surface level because it's just like, everybody likes it, but sometimes like our activism needs to be something that is hard to hear because that's how we like uncover like deep structural issues like, you know, and many Boba liberals will just focus on very surface level issues that will make them seem woke, as opposed to focusing on more like deep structural issues that not only affect the Asian American community as a whole, but also Black, Indigenous people of color communities as well. So yeah.
Yeah, and I think it's like a lot of it is not just only surface level, but it's kind of like catered towards white people or like the majority population. It's very much like we don't want to offend these people. We just want like our culture to be changed in a way that's acceptable for them, which is very much like, oh, like there's so many boba shops now, like everyone's into boba. But it's like it shouldn't have to be that way. I think like from this, I read something from the Daily Brew and it was like it's kind of referring to people who identify as liberal, but it's being adjacent to whiteness rather than like being authentic to our cultural roots. Like if anything is like weird or like
Mm-hmm.
our food smells bad or like they don't quite understand the culture, like we kind of diminish that and like we say, oh, like let's not focus on that. Let's focus on the boba, like the popular like K-pop or like music or culture that white people can enjoy.
Right, right. And I guess I had like a question for you. Like, what were your experiences with Boba liberalism and just like personal experiences, I guess?
Yeah. I mean, even myself, like when I was younger, obviously, like I struggled, like without even knowing it, with like my own kind of boba liberalism. Like,
Hmm.
I feel like a lot of Asian Americans, we kind of have that tendency to, be adjacent to whiteness, kind of wanting to fit in, at schools and our communities. And so, like, personally for me, like, it's been a struggle to, like, kind of distance myself from that. Like, I don't have to choose only parts of my Korean ethnicity that like is appealing to white people, or like I felt like I had to choose for a long time, but like I'm Korean and American, like
Hmm.
those things can coexist. Like I shouldn't have to like pretend that I'm something that I'm not just because
Right,
some people don't like necessarily understand that part of my culture.
right. Yeah. I had like a very similar experience. I think like when I was like a baby activist. I don't know. Like when I was
Yeah.
starting out in educating myself on Asian American politics, Asian American identity, etc. I remember like when I was a freshman in high school and I was just like, yeah, like everything is good. Like as long as like Asians are making it, like that's great. And sometimes we need to take a more critical eye into everything. Like not necessarily like, we have to be able to understand that we can do wrong too and we can do wrong to our own community, and that's something really hard to hear because it's like, at least when I think about like some like us, for example, like when it comes to a lot of activism, we don't often have a holistic representation, which is really unfortunate because the Asian American community is just so diverse, and a lot of the times it's just been focused on East Asian experiences, which is really exclusionary. But
Yeah.
yeah, I just remember like when I was a freshman, I was just like, I don't see anything wrong with the kind of activism that I'm doing. And now moving into me being a freshman into college, like I can see all the faults and stuff like that. And I think that like that kind of growth is something that's really important. No matter if you're just starting out or if you've been like talking about Asian American identity for years now. So yeah.
Yeah, definitely. And I think all of it, another point that's really important to like kind of think about is like Boba liberalism or like this performative activism kind of like washes away like the past, like the
Right.
basically our past of like AAPI, like hate and representation in America. Like everyone's like, especially with the model minority myth, everyone's like, oh, Asian Americans have it so good. They're like all very
Definitely.
smart. They're like accepted in the white community, but like that's really not been the case. Like if you
Yeah.
look like the Chinese exclusion acts or like there's just so many examples of like prejudice, and I feel like Boba liberalism in a way like ignores that because that's not what like white people necessarily want to hear about when they think about history and Asian Americans.
Right. And sort of going off that topic, like, with the uprise in API hate as of recent, it's just been very like hard to see everybody just being like, I don't know how this could have happened when like news coverage itself has been extremely bad, like trying to antagonize like Asian people. And like I remember there was a New York Post article that was using like a picture of Chinatown as like their cover picture talking about the coronavirus, and it's like
Yeah.
how like y'all can't just say like we don't know where this violence is coming from. It's not only coming from the media, but it's also coming from like American imperialism and violence abroad. We can't ignore the history that like we can't ignore how America has affected Asia as well. Like we can't ignore like what America has done in Vietnam, in
Mm-hmm.
Korea, in like Southeast Asia in general. Like there was
Yeah.
so much violence that is just straight up ignored in our US history classes. Like I think for me, most of my understanding of it, like from A push too, which is like the highest level of like US history that
Yeah.
you can
US
take in high
history.
school. It's just like it was just like, yeah, the Chinese Exclusion Act happened and then Japanese internment was bad, but like we never went into it, and that's so awful. We never really went into the history of American imperialism and violence towards the Asian American community.
Yeah. And it's just like it's just so they just push it away. Like it's an uncomfortable thing to talk about, but like I feel like it's so necessary that we do because if we can't talk about those topics or address them, like we can't really say that you understand or like want to be like an activist or proponent for like Asian American representation and like equality and all of that. So
Yeah. And it's
yeah.
just so often seen like right now what we're going through, like what our community is going through, is just really seen as like a temporary thing. I think in a lot of eyes we're like, we can overcome this, we can, but it's not a temporary thing. It's been something that's existed for so long, for as long as Asians have been in America. And I don't
Mm-hmm.
know, it's just so like frustrating to see how people are just sort of ignoring everything that goes on in our community just because like you know like I also blame the American education system for not providing that curriculum into um, providing that information in our in the
Yeah.
US history curriculum. But also it's like we can't ignore our roots and our history. Sometimes like we need to take that step further, and it's hard to because there aren't a lot of resources out there, and it's really difficult to, but it is an important step. But
Yeah. And I think like, in the past few years or so, like there have thankfully been more resources. Like it's definitely something people are talking more about.
mhm.
But like where it comes back to Boba liberalism is like people just because they're reading it or like talking about it, they're like, okay, like that's enough. But like
Right.
really it should be a push for like everyone to be able to get this education. Like you were mentioning, like in our classrooms, right? We should be learning about this history. This is part of, American history, Asian American history. And so I think definitely like getting that push for like actual curriculum, like you were
Right.
saying, is also
Right.
really important.
Yeah. And I feel like the internet has always been such a useful tool. And
Mm-hmm.
like I know that like as of recent, there's just been a lot of Instagram posts that have been educational, but there's also been some that have been like extremely frustrating. So I know that you have
Yeah.
something that you want
Yeah.
to share.
So this was like a post I just saw like on my feed the other day, but here, this is a post that like I saw the other day. Um, it was a reply to a tweet by Naomi Osaka. She was saying like, if people loved Asian people as much as they love bubble tea, anime, mochi, sushi, matcha, etc., imagine profiting or enjoying these things that come from a culture and then attacking slash diminishing the ethnic group that created it. And I really like this reply by angry Asian feminist. She said this, but also even if you don't love our food, culture, etc., you should still care about our issues because we are humans and we matter. And I thought that was so important because like it shouldn't like basic respect for a community or for a person shouldn't be contingent upon like whether you enjoy their culture. You know,
Right.
that should just be the base level. Like treating others with common dignity. I think.
Right.
And
Yeah.
so like I think a lot of times like these kind of posts can be a little harmful. Like it's kind of that Boba liberalism where it's like, yeah, like white people, since you love our stuff so much, show us some respect. But it should be just show us some respect because we're all like
Yeah. Like
human beings.
I understand the logic behind that and stuff like that. And I think it's just like it's a profitability thing. It's like, "Hey, remember the fact that like we make products for you or like we make things that you enjoy? Please support us." And it's like, "No. We are humans. That's why you should support us." And I think that like also goes into like Instagram activism in general as well. I just think that like as of late whenever a moment of harm comes to any community in America, the first thing you see is just a flood of like aesthetically pleasing posts where it's like, they're made on Canva and it's like I think there's been like memes of it or like parody posts where it's like, "Oh, how to support like this community." And it's like that's great, but sometimes we need to go past those aesthetics. We shouldn't like used Canva templates to express our frustration. Like it's like you can't just make everything pretty. Violence isn't pretty and our response to it shouldn't be either. And it's just like I understand Instagram is such a great conduit for like, passing on information, but sometimes we need to understand that like we shouldn't be trying to like gain all that social capital, gain all those likes and gain all those shares for our own social clout and understand, like take time to understand how our communities are hurting and then put that nuanced understanding into our post so that we can share something that is more substantial and isn't just
Yeah,
all sugar and no substance like boba, you know?
exactly. And I think that's like something that I've thought about a lot too, because it's like a lot of the times people are just so unwilling to listen. Like
Right.
if you don't come at them with like something that's aesthetically pleasing or like comfortable for them. And like the question is like, how do we have these difficult conversations with people who aren't necessarily like willing to do so? And so like I understand like, making pretty posts and like things that might make the feeler like the reader feel good or like at least not feel attacked in some sort of
Mhm.
way. But like you were saying, I think it's important. Like it's not pretty, all the violence that's been happening, and it's not easy to talk about. So that's definitely something like with social media that I think is so like hard to navigate. You
Right.
know,
Right.
and like
Yeah, I
another
think
thing.
oh, you go.
Oh yeah, and then another thing is just like you see these posts and then like when something happens, when harm happens, like everyone is posting about it,
Mm-hmm.
because they like quote unquote have to. Like you see
Mm-hmm.
big corporations, like even our school, like USC, they release
Mm-hmm.
a statement, but it's like
Right.
so surface level, it doesn't
Mm-hmm.
actually address any of the issues like we're talking about a lot of the
Yeah.
times.
Yeah. And I think like a lot of institutions and even people in general, like in on an individual level and on an institutional level, like some people are just feeling obligated to do this for the sake of optics, for like the sake of like looking like you're not racist or looking like you're supportive of a community. And it's like, yes, we do appreciate you, spreading that like educational material, but at the same time, if you don't have an understanding of what's going on, then what you're doing is not that helpful because it's like you yourself, it's like, yeah, like I'll just press share, send this out, and people will see. But have you read the post? Have you thought about what the wording in the post comes to? And I think like going back to USC on an institutional level, I think that USC specifically Dornsief's letter. I remember there were a lot of complaints about
Yeah,
Dornsief's letter where they were
yeah,
like, this was like I think it was like they said something like it was like a mindless action or like a senseless act of violence or something like that. And it's like it wasn't senseless. There was like it was clearly something that was racist, and I think we should start calling out racism for what it is. Racism is racism. Racism isn't
yeah,
senseless. Racism isn't, you know, like just something that comes out of nowhere. It's historically like influenced. It's like it's been with us for so long, and I think that like even beyond USC, um like institutions should be doing more to support APIDA communities and like not just APIDA communities, but like all marginalized communities in any time of pain and violence.
yeah. And I think yeah, and I understand like on an individual level, like sometimes you don't have the capacity to, like be involved or like always be like reading about like these violent acts or like the
Mm-hmm.
history, but like especially on the institutional level, they have so much influence, money, time,
Right.
power. Like they could be doing so much more, but we get things like a yellow square on Instagram or
Oh
like
my God. About the
you
yellow
know
square.
like it's like how long did that take your PR team to like come up with, and like why isn't your institution worth millions or even billions of dollars doing
Right.
anything to help these communities that probably you've helped marginalize,
Yeah, right. And I don't know, in general, I think like, like USC has like a pretty big endowment,
yeah.
and like we're paying so much. Like I just wish that like that money would go towards like resources that actually like genuinely help these marginalized communities because, we're still going through school and we also have that burden of like having to process that violence that has just happened to our community. Like I think
Mhm.
for me on a class level, I think only one of my classes out of like the four that I'm currently taking talked about it, and we only talked about it for like 20-30 minutes, and then we had to shift back. And I understand, we all have a syllabus to follow, we all have like a schedule to follow, but sometimes it's important to have these conversations because like sometimes other students won't have these conversations, you know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
sometimes like if you're just not part of the APIDA community, you just won't have the conversations about like APIDA violence and stuff like that. And I just think that like we should be doing like institutions should be doing more to ensure that there's enough education on everything that's going on. I don't know.
Yeah. No, definitely. And especially in a place like that claims to be as diverse. Well, it is diverse, as like Los Angeles or even the greater United States, then also claims to have like this great diversity, and it's like a hub for immigrants to like come and like get a fresh start. Like there should be that kind of level of education, like because immigrants and Asian Americans and just all of these communities are so like integral to the structure of America.
Right.
And like when there's no education about it, like how are people like supposed to know about those things? So I think like institutions and I think education, like we were talking about, just has such a
Hmm.
big role to play.
Yeah, and what really is diversity if you don't have equity? You know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
you can have like for example in media representation, you can have all of the Asian actors or like Latinx actors or black actors in your movies, but like if they have no speaking roles, then what's the point? We need to find that fine balance of like equity, being able to represent our stories accurately and not like, change them to be palatable. Like our stories are what they are, and like we shouldn't have to change our narratives just so that like white people are comfortable or like anybody that isn't part of our community is comfortable. Like our story is what it is. It is what it is. Take it or leave it. I mean, you should take it. Take it
Definitely take
in.
it. Take
Yeah,
it.
definitely take it. But like, we shouldn't be trying to change ourselves. We shouldn't be trying to change our community. We shouldn't be trying to change our narratives just to fit like this American fabric because sometimes we do need like some ruffles in the fabric,
Some
you
ruffles in
know?
the fabric. Yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
there are ruffles in the fabric, and we can't like necessarily smooth those out. Like they're part of, what makes us us who we are. So like
Mhm.
I think, and that's like the big thing with Boba liberalism in the
Mhm.
end. Like it's about not smoothing things out. It's not making things acceptable
Mhm.
for other people. It's
Yeah.
trying to be accepted for who we are.
Yeah,
Yeah.
definitely. And I think just like, it's important for our activism to like go beyond boba.
Beyond Boba,
Beyond
yes.
boba. And it's like, like we shouldn't just like obviously caring about the APITA community is very, very important. And we should like not only just like focus our energy. Like I understand that like Asia is just so vast.
Yeah.
And like, we often are grouped into like East Asian, South Asian, Southeast Asian, etc. And it's like, we should go beyond our like little communities within the Asian communities and like reach out. Like for the East Asian community, it's like we should make sure that we're understanding South Asian experiences in America, and we should be understanding Southeast Asian, experiences in America, and et cetera, just because our experiences are just so vast. But outside of the APITA community, we also need to ensure that we're giving the support that we can to other marginalized communities that are hurting
Yeah.
in their like times of pain and violence.
Yeah. And I think that's another thing. Like Boba liberalism doesn't ask people to necessarily watch out for other minorities. Like,
Hmm.
and so often like it's almost divisive in a way. Like,
Right.
you know, Boba liberalism basically preaches like, oh, Asians are the like model minority, like they've made
Hmm.
it, so why
Hmm.
can't you?
Hmm.
When like both of the like one, not like all Asian Americans have made it. Like Crazy Rich Asians is not all
Right.
representative of the entire like
Right.
APTA community, and like second, like even if that were true, like why does that mean we can't support other marginalized communities? Like it
Hmm.
should be like a group effort. Like we should be supporting each other. But Boba
Right.
liberalism kind of in a way makes that divisive, I think.
Right. Very, very, very true. And I think, even for non-APITA people, I think it also affects like people who aren't in our community, like Boba liberalism in a way, because like, there's that feeling that like, oh, there's a certain way that Asian American activism should look like. And often the blueprint is just like, for like, at least how I've been seeing it, it's just like Boba liberalism where you're just posting posts. You talk about things when it's convenient for you. And, activism shouldn't be something that is like comfortable or something that's convenient, because how are we going to enact change if we're just staying in our comfort zone? Like we have to push the boundaries one way or another. And, for like non-APITA people, I think it's also just important for like non-APITA people to not solely rely on us for like the education. We're exhausted. We're tired.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think like if you do find yourself like being uncomfortable with these kind of topics, like ask yourself why. Why are you uncomfortable? Like, and a lot of the times it's because, you probably benefit in some way from like the marginalization of these communities. And it's not necessarily your fault. It's the way like the system has kind of been built, but it is like everyone's responsibility to kind of understand like the institutionalism, where like all of those, where that discomfort is coming from, and then kind of do something about it rather than just ignoring the discomfort and pushing that aside so you can enjoy your boba or
Right.
what have you. Yeah.
Yeah. I think that's like a pretty good place to end. I mean, in conclusion, um, you should always take your activism beyond, once again, beyond boba.
Beyond boba, yeah.
And ensure that, like, you're like, question yourself. Like, am I uncomfortable because I'm not truly going more in depth and stuff like that? Like, question why you're uncomfortable. Question how systems have, like, changed our points of view. Like, we should always be using our, like, retrospection and reflection to try and understand what is going on in the world, I guess.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right, cool. So I guess that pretty much wraps it up for this week's episode. Thank you, everyone, so much for listening to another episode of Beyond Boba.
And for this podcast episode, we will actually be giving away a copy of Kathy Park Hong's Minor Feelings. Here's a summary of what her memoir is about. Poet and essayist Kathy Park Hong blends memoir, cultural criticism, and history to expose the truth of radicalized consciousness in America. Binding these essays together is Hong's theory of minor feelings. As the daughter of Korean immigrants, Kathy Park Hong grew up steeped in shame, suspicion, and melancholy. She would later understand these minor feelings occur when American optimism contradicts your own reality, when you believe the lies that you've been told about your own racial identity. Hong uses her story as a portal into a deeper examination of racial consciousness in America today. This book traces her relationship to the English language, to shame and depression, to poetry and art making, and to family and female friendship in search to both uncover and speak the truth. And this is the cover of the book, Minor Feelings, that we're giving away.
Yeah, so it's a super amazing book, and I would definitely recommend reading it. So if you're a USC student, please go to our bit.ly link, bit.ly/beyondboba3 for a chance to win our prize. The giveaway will close a week after today, so make sure to fill that out. And then next week's episode will be about the monolithic myth surrounding AAPI identities. So make sure to stay tuned for that. And as always, let us know any thoughts, comments, questions you had at beyondbobapodcast@gmail.com. And we hope to see you next week. Thank you for listening.